Men, what are the struggles of dating a very rich girl? This is probably going to get buried, but I've always wanted to write it out. I was never sure how rich she was. I just knew her family had property in a couple places in the US and China, and this is also how I found out property in China is dumb expensive. When she went for the holidays, if she wanted to stay in Shanghai and then go to Beijing later, she didn't have to look at hotels or Airbnb. She just had to make sure she grabbed the right set of keys. It was weird. She wasn't dripping with designer clothes and drove a fuel-efficient compact, but just looking at where her family had apartments or houses, I can only imagine. She was a super sweet, down-to-earth girl. Biggest heart in the world. Very hardworking and acted like a child in a candy shop everywhere she went. I think the biggest strain came when we would eat together. For me, money was tight, and the best way to stretch my college scholarship money was to cook meals in bulk. Before she met me, she ate out literally every single meal. At first, it took some adjusting and rebudgeting. Bless her heart. She understood and found compromises. She loved my cooking and would surprise me with groceries and then say I have to pay her back by cooking whatever she wanted. Every once in a while, she'd pick up the entirety of a bill that we were supposed to split, but she always found a way to make sure I didn't feel down about it. I don't think she ever once bought me an expensive gift. Most things were either handmade or were very thoughtful. For example, shoes I'd been eyeing for months but couldn't afford, and she noticed them on my computer browser. I miss that girl. I hope she's doing well. Man, how could you break up with such a girl? Story 2. If you're coming from a very poor family, as was my case, expect a lot of bickering when it comes to financial issues. I was raised very poor. Now I make a decent amount of money, but if I'm ever in a situation where I have a lot of expenses and may run into financial issues, I tend to panic a little bit and plan my spending extremely carefully. My wife came from a wealthy family and she never had to deal with financial struggles at any point in her life, and she doesn't quite care about spending a lot of money. Basically, she doesn't think past the fact that we can afford something. She doesn't think about possibly needing money in the future, and that's where we always bicker. In short, make sure you ask her to let you know before she spends more than X amount. That was the solution we came up with, and it has actually saved us from a lot of financial trouble. Spending should be a thing you both agree on. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. Story 3. I dated a girl in college that came from a very wealthy family. Texas oil money. Like, she flew from Dallas to Florida, where she went to school in her daddy's business jet. That kind of rich. I think the biggest thing for me was how out of touch she was with everyday money issues. For example, someone smashed into my car in the parking lot and I was totally upset about it. She was like, "It's okay, you can just get a new one." She had no concept of how insurance or deductibles work, and she didn't understand that I could not simply go out and get it fixed right away. Another example was that she wanted me to go to Miami to see a U2 concert with her. She had front row tickets. I couldn't go because I had to work. She didn't understand that my boss would not care about how cool it would be to see U2. This was before they became terrible. Story 4. Admitting financial struggles. When my wife and I were dating in university, her family invited me up to their cottage during the break between Christmas and New Year's to ski, skate, and otherwise play in the snow. I wanted to go, but I didn't know how to ski and had no outdoor clothing appropriate to be out in the snow. No ski jacket, pants, or boots. I declined the invitation. But my then girlfriend was really sad and asked why. I had to admit I didn't have the gear needed and I couldn't afford them. She then passed it on to her family, and when I visited them on Christmas Day, they led me to a room with 3 types of everything new with tags laid out and a bed for me to choose from. It was a wonderful gesture, but I had mixed feelings. I appreciated the gear very much, but it felt like a charity case. We're both professionals and doing pretty well by most standards, but our fairly quiet or comfortable life is still different from how she was raised. Our in-laws have several international properties, so we can afford to travel by visiting the same places and staying at their places. It doesn't feel too weird now being around her family. We have several kids, so that's the focus of get-togethers. I'm treated well, and they're genuinely nice people. We've had to ask them to tone down Christmases for our kids, and they've been respectful of that. Their gifts were dwarfing ours. But again, that's not a terrible problem to have. Also, managing expectations of my wife for travel and expectations with children's activities. She was used to jetting away whenever they felt like it and had her own horses growing up. That's just not an option for us. We do okay and we're happy, but horses are not financially viable. Who needs a ski resort when you've got your own personal gear shop at the in-laws' place? Story 5. Let me tell a story that I think will provide a nice contrast to the majority of the comments here. The story isn't mine, but that of a close friend's brother. So Joe went away to college and met Sarah there halfway through freshman year. They were on again, off again, for a few months, before deciding to date seriously in junior year. They met each other's families on vacation or when they would come to visit their kids at school. By all accounts, Sarah's family was polite, nice, and relatively laid back. Not a whiff of arrogance or anything like that. Fast forward to the end of senior year. Joe's paternal grandfather is on his last breath, and Joe desperately wants to go say goodbye. However, they go to school in a small town with a private airport. Think Cessnas. And the closest majority airport is several hours away by car, and neither of them have a car. Said airport also didn't have a direct flight, so it would have been pushing 24 hours until he got to the hospice center to see his grandfather. This was destroying Joe, as he and Grandpa were very close and he was essentially a second father to him. Without a word, Sarah pulled Joe into a cab and took him to the airport. Waiting for them was Sarah's family's private plane. Joe and my friend and her family were all astounded. They had no idea Sarah's family was wealthy, and especially not private plane wealthy. Anyways, off Joe went and he said goodbye and he flew coach back to school. Sarah never said a word about it one way or the other, and neither did Joe. They're now married and both doing well in their careers, and from what I can tell, live a very normal life. But every once in a while, they disappear off to some remote island or jungle or mountain for a few days a year and don't tell anyone but their family where they're going. Story 6. My then fiancé, now wife, did something similar with a story 5, but the Kirkland version. One of my closest friends had been found unresponsive, and I just moved to my wife's city because I was going to propose as soon as I found a full-time job. I was sleeping on a couch, doing delivery driving for rent money while I sent out resumes. No chance I could afford a flight and pay rent, especially a last-minute ticket. I called her in a panic at 3 a.m., and she just said she'd be at my place ASAP. Showed up with coffee, snacks, and her debit card. Dropped me at the airport and told me to buy whatever flight got me there first. We talk a lot about money now, and I'd say we have a very healthy relationship to our spending. But it was scary to start that while dating. I was in debt from grad school. Her grandparents paid for one of the most expensive private schools in the country. I was on a rice and beans diet, and not for the first time. She had last-minute plane ticket money. I didn't grow up poor or anything, but during grad school, I was living paycheck to paycheck working at a nonprofit. She had a full-time job on top of the family security. It's not a private jet, but the flexibility to afford several $100s without question was both a beautiful gift and pretty intimidating. In fact, I took a Greyhound back because I was too scared to put a second flight in her card. It was terrible. Story 7. I guess I had a different type than everyone else. We worked together, and you wouldn't know she was rich unless you really got to know her. She worked as a diversion, something to do and meet new people. She never looked at the price of anything. Had a $5,000 watch, Dolce & Gabbana glasses she would break at least once a month because she's clumsy. Very humble, very sweet, and probably the hardest worker there. We were managers. The issue was that there was absolutely nothing we could do together that was new to her. She had more money and free time. Her bucket list was completed by 22. There was nothing new or fresh within my, I don't know the word, realm, ability. We got along great, and I found out from a mutual friend she was excited to be with someone not using her or groveling because she was get-stuffed levels of rich. It was my pride, I think, that ruined it. Nothing she did. I had issues letting her pay for everything, and I was unable to show her anything she hadn't seen. I stopped being fun because I couldn't wow or impress her, and it got in my head. She was perfectly happy doing normal things, but it wasn't enough for me. I had to impress her. We lost contact years ago. I hope she's doing well. She was awesome and deserves to be happy. I'm happy where I ended up. I'm madly in love with my wife and couldn't imagine a life without her. If I could go back and change things, I wouldn't, because I'd want to end up with the one I have, who's also way out of my league. That being said, I think I'm one of the incredibly few guys who met 2 keepers in his life. I stand by my choice. Story 8. Not rich, but more than middle class. Meeting the people she knows. It's hard to talk about my average self, and my audience is a collection of some of the most gifted, driven, accomplished people I've come across. For instance, the first friend she introduced me to. One had temporarily quit healthcare, traveled the world making a documentary, and then spent 6 months delivering healthcare in some third-world country. Returning a few weeks before we met, and the other had entered into sports journalism and is very quickly climbing the ladder to one of the most reputable newspapers of the nation. After hearing them share their interesting stories about each other, it came to me. I'm sitting there, trying my best to make. I fixed up a rental property, then spent 4 hours a night studying every day of the past couple months. Sound interesting? This happens almost every time. Theoretical physicists, accomplished sportsmen, artists, and a lot of medical students or professionals. Then me, a glorified white van man with aspirations and something I should have studied 7 years earlier, instead of going straight into the workforce with a forklift license. Story 9. I married a wealthy girl and it was weird at first. Luckily, I make a six-figure salary, so I didn't feel completely out of my element. But I remember the first time her parents invited us to the country club in the summer. My, at the time, girlfriend, wife asked me what I was going to wear and I was baffled. At that point, I just wore jeans, t-shirts, flannels, and gym shorts. I had a great collection of shoes, but they were basically boots, flip-flops, or Vans tennis shoes. I didn't play golf, but I did play a bunch of disc golf. I had to go out, buy new outfits, learn proper silverware techniques and all that. Years later, I've become very close with her family, but at one point, I had to stand up and draw a line in the sand, which basically said I'm never going to pop my collar, wear dress shoes or jeans, or join this country club. I'm always going to smoke, own a pit bull, or two, and stay home on Sunday mornings. But I will make sure your daughter has the best life I can possibly provide her. Now we're very close, and they feel bad because they're terrible grandparents, and money can't help them with that one. Story 10. She wasn't super rich, but she had an enjoyable media-related job in a decent-sized flat in the city center with modern decor and amenities. I just felt so insecure. Here's me, at the time, with a manual labor job, bewildered at the price of food and drink at this place she suggested. £4 and 50 pence a pint, and £15 for a paper-thin pizza-looking thing. I could tell she was happy in life with a job she loved. Her life was set. We still had a good night in the end. We had a few drinks, and the night had a happy ending. We talked for a while afterwards, but it just kind of fizzled out. I often thought back about that date and thought I could be like her if I just put my mind to it and got out of this terrible job. Now I'm studying at a university for a chance at a career I can be proud of. Story 11. Not the man, but the rich girl. I hope you guys are interested in my story. I come from a family who built their way in the world and got very wealthy. Growing up, my parents had me and my sister working regular jobs so we would learn the value of money. It worked. Back then, I was not allowed to date anyone until I was 18. Not that I ever cared because I was a nerd and preferred my video games to real people. When I got older and nature described to kick in, I was starting college and I met a guy. He was very handsome. I did not seem to care who my family was. I was pleased because most people would fake to be my friends because of my background. That lasted until I met his parents. He was from a lower middle class family and his parents were all about the "what are the neighbors going to think" mindset. They're so excited about me that they started being so weird. Buying a Mercedes that they could not afford, buying nice clothes, expensive wines. For Christmas, my dad gave my ex a very old bottle of wine. The following day, we went to dinner with his family and he described opening the bottle. They were so happy to drink it. They were all saying how good it was. When I smelled the wine before drinking it, I knew right away the wine was not good. It was bouchonné. It basically tasted like vinegar. The ex's family was drinking it like it was the best thing on earth. I never had the guts to tell them since they were almost done with the bottle. The guy just got terrible after a few years. We moved together in a very nice downtown condo and he went mad. He loaded his credit card to buy expensive watches, suits, shoes. My dad got him a job in a good company and I guess he thought he was a big shot now. I left him about 6 months later because he was trying to change me into a trophy wife. He was getting upset if I did not have makeup on or if I was gaming in my PJs all day or night because, if someone would have knocked on the door and I was dressed like that, what would they have thought? When I left, I was still paying for the condo he was living in. His parents were pestering me about their son's future and trying to manipulate me into going back. I'm not that stupid. I tried to get him to buy me out of the condo. He did not want to. We got into a massive legal fight. It was terrible. Story 12. They don't understand the cost of money. I'm dating a girl who has never wanted for anything. Her parents put $100,000 in her account one year just for spending money. She wants to go out to eat all the time, constantly. I'm trying to make my freelance company work, which has been profitable but still not making that much money, and she's eating all of my money. We pay separately, but still, going out every night to expensive sit-down places is ridiculously expensive. I'm at my wit's end about it. I like her and she's nice, but I've literally almost gone broke just due to eating food out with her. I'm about to do so again. I spent at least $2,000 in food over the past month. I don't want to go out to eat. I can spend $10 to $20 in a week for food and be satisfied. She wants to spend $70 plus a day for food. I had to eat rice and vegetables for weeks because I was so broke, because she wants to go to fancy dinners on the other weeks. I've had to talk to convince her not to do this and why we don't eat in instead, and even offered to cook, but it's just super difficult to convince her to do this. Story 13. I dated a rather wealthy girl in college. Not dumb rich or get stuffed money rich, but $5,000 a month expense account rich. One day I was at her family's for dinner and her dad made some underhanded comment about my family status. I was done hearing it, so I looked at him and asked him, "What's important to you?" He was kind of confused and I clarified, "What things in your life are important to you?" He goes on about success, career, striving to make more money, his business, and then, "Oh, and family," was the last thing he said. I simply responded, "That's where you and I differ. When someone asks me what's important to me, your daughter is at the top of my list, not an afterthought. That's why she's dating me over some other rich guy that will always put her last." His wife and my girlfriend both kind of snickered as he sat there wide-eyed. He didn't respond and went back to eating. It never bothered us again with his snide remarks. We broke up for unrelated reasons, though. There was a difference in values I couldn't get past, but I think that's one reason why she liked me. What I lacked in money, I definitely made up for in character. I had no interest in pandering to her father. It didn't intimidate me, and his status didn't mean anything to me. She loved that I was witty enough to handle as rich people talk and wasn't afraid to speak my mind. Story 14. My buddy married a super rich girl from China. He grew up in the suburbs and came from an economically poor family. He went from rags to riches. Literally started from nothing. I remember growing up as kids, he'd eat mayonnaise sandwiches at school. He changed quite a bit. He went from having nothing that was branded to suddenly having everything, including a brand new Porsche. He was outfitted with super expensive clothes, lost a bunch of weight, and turned out pretty good for himself. Anyway, he later discovered that his in-laws were just using him for immigration or business purposes, since he's a citizen here and he ended up divorcing his wife, having no kids. Half of nothing is, well, nothing. He got a divorce with the clothes on his back and his car that he was given. Since the divorce, he got a high-paying corporate job, making 6 figures. Still has all his luxury goods and is currently dating someone who looks like a supermodel. Oh yeah, and he still has his Porsche SUV. He's also super generous with money. On numerous occasions, he would buy drinks, dinners, give money to friends in actual need, and feed the poor, since he grew up poor. He's sort of careless with money since he never really had it to begin with. He grew up with a minimalist lifestyle. His marriage literally changed his life. His advantage over his ex-wife was the fact that they both hated university. His ex-wife dropped out of university, but he had the nerve to keep going and actually complete his program, which is why he's making so much money now, as this became his backup plan after his divorce. Story 15. Dated the daughter of multimillionaires for 3 years. I'm a working-class lad from Yorkshire. She was Sunni Muslim and I'm non-religious. Grew up strict Christian, though. Her dad didn't like me. I have tattoos and piercings, which he despised. Her mom was lovely. The Muslim thing wasn't an issue to them. The fact that I was a different nationality and wasn't rich was the biggest issue. The relationship was great, but she was so spoiled and entitled, but because I'm the type to call people out on their BS, it kind of worked well. She needed someone to tell her no, which she'd never had before. We nearly got married, but eventually we broke up. There was a lot of pressure from her family, and she's with a Muslim guy from her home country now, which I guess was inevitable. Weirdly enough, she's one of 4 wealthy girls I've dated, and here's the biggest issue with dating rich girls, and why I'll probably never do it again. They think they can just throw money at you and it'll solve all the problems. No affection, ridiculous entitlement, inability to communicate in the depth of a puddle. Give me a working class that's up for a laugh any time over that. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 16. In my experience, gifts seem to be the language of love, both giving and receiving. She would buy me things and tell me how much I meant to her, and she expected the same in return. I was by no means poor, but my family believed in a strong work ethic and taught money management. So when I went to college, she only paid tuition and said I had to pay for everything else. I learned a minimum wage job makes just enough for a roof and ramen. She didn't understand that I couldn't afford gifts all the time. Also, not being able to take her out to eat, to the movies, out in the town in general on a weekly basis was a big deal. At the same time, you can't blame her. It was how her family communicated their feelings. We were both young and hadn't lived life yet. I haven't talked to her in almost 15 years. I really hope she has learned that love is not a gift purchased, but is something conveyed through speech and actions to show your significant other. Story 17. My wife is very well off. She's a super successful doctor. She makes enough money that I don't have to work. When we started dating, I was a single father living in my parents' basement. I can say this with all honesty. If she's a good person, her money doesn't matter. The people with bad experiences didn't have bad experiences with rich women. They had bad experiences with terrible people who happened to be rich. My wife was amazing. She never made me feel bad, supported me, and helped me find a career where I flourished and succeeded. Her money has never been an issue in any way. She's my best friend, and the struggles are as such. I get to fly first class to amazing places and stay in luxurious hotels. I get to make dinner and pack lunches for her for work. She works crazy hours sometimes. I get to use that time to do tons of gaming and playing with my kid. We bought a huge, awesome acreage, and I'll be retiring before 40 to take care of the property, her and my son. Her family's kind, loving, and hilarious. Super welcoming and loving my son like one of their own. They love how happy I make her and how much I take care of her. There's never been a single thing other than normal relationship fights we all occasionally have. Oh, there is one thing. She often forgets I don't make the same amount of money, so when I bought a new vehicle, she wanted us to go buy a fancy thing. I wanted to buy my own vehicle that was economical and probably used. We compromised and bought a new but not flashy truck. Also, she would spend more on a purse than I would for a used car, and I can't for the life of me wrap my head around it. But I grew up dirt poor, like no toys and spam poor, so we just grew up in different worlds. Anyways, all this babbling to say, if she's a good person raised by good people, and he or she isn't an insecure child, there are no issues, only delightful perks you never expected. I have a thing for strong women, so her making so much money than me never bugged me. I'm just very proud of her and her passion and ambition, and that she chose me. I often joke that I'm living every 1960s girl's dream. She often jokes that she worked this hard so she could marry poor if that's what she fell in love with. Story 18. I dated a woman for 5 years who used to spend $100,000 a month in Neiman Marcus. I grew up in the hood, got out of the hood, and our paths collided in my old job. She was probably the most attractive woman I'd ever been with, and she had money. Traveled really well. She opened my eyes to how wealthy people think as far as saying yes to opportunities and not having guilt for success. But otherwise, we lived on two completely different planets. I felt I was brought around by her wealthy friends as almost a real-life zoo animal. Look at my poor pet from this hood we've all heard about in the news. I was at the job we met through for 4 years and it didn't pay very well. She was more than happy to pay for everything, but it started getting annoying with her automatically paying. I wanted to contribute. The last year of our relationship, I landed a new job that quadrupled my income. She flipped out a little because she thought I didn't need her anymore, that I was only with her for the money. Most likely because that's how she's been with other wealthy men. That wasn't true. We loved each other and I wanted her to understand that's not how real people work. Later on, I discovered how messed up of a childhood she had and never knew what it meant to be loved properly. I think that's also why she loved me so much, because I was the first to love who she was as a person, not because of circumstances, money, or whatever other weird reasons. Being with her was probably the best 5 years of my life, but ultimately, we had to go our separate ways. I'm grateful I got to experience the things I did when we were together, and I'm incredibly fortunate to have had 5 great years living the ultimate fantasy life in most all aspects. We lived and loved as big as we could, put everything on the table, full and complete trust in every level. It was fantastic. She was definitely what I would consider to be the love of my life. Our situation was complex, and we both knew deep down it wasn't going to last. So I think it was wise for both of us to reluctantly bow out at the time we did. The race had run its course, and it was time. Story 19. My girlfriend grew up pretty well off and developed some expensive habits and tastes. When we first started dating, she was okay with eating at Chick-fil-A and restaurants of the sorts, but as time went on, she started to refuse going there and wanted to go out to better places. There was one night where she was going to cook dinner before we went out for the night. She messed up the recipe a bit and tossed the whole meal in the trash and said we could just go eat out somewhere. I panicked because money was low and I didn't know how I would pay for gas or rent until I got paid again. I threw out suggestions for things I could afford like pizza, chicken, or Mexican food, but she and her sister decided they wanted to go to this upscale steakhouse. We went there and she and her sister both had like $35 meals, so I didn't order anything and just said I was feeling sick and not hungry. I don't know if she fully grasped the concept of bills and how expensive they can be. Her parents paid for everything for her. We had many conversations about money and not being able to afford fancy dinners, but she would always say that I need to save my money and be smarter with it. Looks like his girlfriend's taste buds are more upscale than his bank account. Story 20. Disconnect about what sharing really means and why it's important. Very early on, we moved in together, and beside me having to hide my stuff when I was there, there's one story that sticks out the most. I bought a case of drink, a 2 to 4 for my fellow Ontario folk, put it in the fridge because we had some guests come over for dinner. Now it's university days, so people are not rich by any means. I worked a high-paying summer job, so I was happy to share my spoils a bit. Everyone who came in could have a few drinks, and I was happy to share it. At the end of the night, she was upset. She finally asked me, "Why did you give all our drinks away?" She didn't even drink much. She had all the wine in the world. I was shocked. I explained my reasoning, and she was still mad. This should have been a red flag. This behavior never really changed. I stuck it out 7 years. I do authentically regret trying to make it work. Story 21. Not a man but the rich girl in this scenario, complete with horses. It took me a long time to find a man who was secure enough in themselves and their career to deal with it. But we are down-home people, and my parents are literally the most welcoming people on the face of the earth. I have a girlfriend whose dad passed away a couple of years ago. Her parents' combined income was less than my friend's, but she wasn't really in a financial spot to send all of her disposable income home. My parents wrote her mom a check to cover all of her dad's medical expenses with no expectation of ever being paid back, and immediately booked her a first-class ticket home. They would give you the shirt off their backs and expect me and my siblings to exhibit those same values. Both of my parents grew up poor and in the South. Moved to California in the 70s. Both worked their way up the corporate ladder. Dad sold some companies along the way to the IBMs and Ciscos of the world. Now we are very comfortable. I fly private more than I fly commercial. I didn't pay for college, and I now have a corporate job where I'm personally taking home $400,000 plus per year. It's all about perspective. I worked hard because it was the example set for me. I completely understand the outside perspective that I was handed everything in my life. Because nepotism, and yup, I'm rich. But I graduated from high school with a 4.5 GPA. Was a 3-sport varsity athlete, got a full-ride academic scholarship, graduated from college in 3 years, and had busted myself to build my own career. My parents showed us the value of a dollar from childhood. We didn't have an allowance growing up. We had to work for our money. I didn't touch my trust fund until I'm 35. And even then, there are restrictions on how and what I can spend money on. It's not that I care solely about money or that my parents push us toward that. They want us to be happy and would support us in any endeavor that brings us joy. But when you grow up seeing the most influential people in your lives work tirelessly to provide for your family, it becomes your default setting. I've dated people all over the socioeconomic spectrum and ended up with someone who is also a high earner. Obviously, we're not the same level as my parents, but I had to find a partner who has the same drive and spirit that I do to provide for our future family. I've capitalized on the opportunities afforded to me, and I would be disappointed in myself if I hadn't turned those opportunities into my own personal success. My husband and I do well for ourselves, but it has been his family that has been really tough for us to deal with. He grew up lower middle class, never went to bed hungry, but definitely not wealthy. They live in Central California and absolutely despise that he married up. They've called me every single name under the sun, including his mom calling me despicable words in her toast at our wedding. They feel that they've been left behind and expect that we should pay for their every little whim because he married a spoiled little rich girl. They have not taken the opportunity or initiative to know me beyond the big house and the Amex card. All they see is money. They sent me an invoice for their mortgage recently. His mom asked me for a Mercedes for Christmas, and it wasn't a joke. It's such a shame, because we probably would help them out if they weren't so overtly unkind to me and taking every opportunity to undermine our marriage. I guess my one key takeaway here is, although I am wealthy and can solve a lot of problems with money, there are some things you can't. I do understand that some people are out of touch with reality, but not all of us. I'm very comfortable, and I want my kids to also have the same opportunities that I did, but they've got to work for it too. To me, it's less about money and more about values. Of course, coming from wealth affords you more opportunity than coming from lower income families, but it's really about values. Trust fund babies can blow all their money, I've seen this plenty of times, or make more of it. Low income families can save and move up or blow it. It all comes from what you want out of your life. Story 22. Not taking advantage of that fact and comparing your own success to theirs. I was raised independent from childhood by a single mother who worked in education. We didn't live in squalor, but teachers don't make bank by any means. I wound up dating a woman several years ago. His family owned a number of Cayman Island resorts, and we wound up getting a townhouse together in the last half of our relationship. I was working full-time in a rental car business. I was making enough to ensure that my half of the bills and rent were taken care of, and proud of that fact, but it definitely was a little surreal, and admittedly grating, and I'd never tell her this, but from time to time it made me feel bad about my own ability to provide. To come home and have her tell me about the $900 manicure she just got, or the $1,400 dress she just ordered. It's awful, but growing up just above the bare minimum line leaves a mark on someone that never goes away. Envy really is the worst feeling in the world because, unlike jealousy, you're not just wanting what someone else has. There's this insidious little voice in your head whispering away, reminding you that you will never be that rich, that successful, because you're awful and you're worthless, that you didn't work hard enough and don't deserve it, when in reality there's absolutely no correlation between working hard and being filthy, stinking rich. Story 23. This will be buried, but my girlfriend is 26 and has over $7 million, even more in investments. I bring in like $300 a week, and to be honest, we dated for a good 6 months before I found out how filthy rich she is. When she was one, she got in a car accident and her car seat paralyzed her. After a lawsuit, she was awarded a huge settlement that paid out in full when she turned 18. Since then, she's been investing her money into various companies. It's a little awkward when she wants to do huge, expensive trips, but we manage. When I found out how rich she really was, it was when she bet me I wouldn't walk out of our room with my thing sticking out when her friend came over in the morning. I told her, I'll do it if you take me to Disneyland. She hates Disneyland, and she said she'll take us for 2 days. I thought it was all part of a joke. After I sent her a male friend screaming, she was Googling resorts or hotels, etc. We didn't end up going because I thought she was joking. Later, we had to talk about how much money she actually has. I should have put two and two together earlier, but I honestly had no idea to the extent. She doesn't like when people know how much money she has, hence keeping it a secret from me for so long. She's an amazing woman, speaks French, Spanish, Arabic, and a little Russian. She's helped a nonprofit company that came up with an indigenous design for a brake system for wheelchairs, and she's helping me get a book edited and published through the network of people she knows. Story 24. Not extremely rich, but lived in the nice suburbs and had well-off parents. Her dad alone made probably 10 times what my parents made combined. High maintenance. She knew she was well off and put a lot of pressure on me to be well off for the future too, even though we were just in high school. A lot of mental issues. Money doesn't fix everything, and now that I've dated girls from more humble backgrounds, they're more likely to appreciate the little things and stay happy. Not very sympathetic when it came to money. My mom lost her job once and it made us even poorer for a few months, and my girlfriend just didn't understand how stressed I was. I would even get mad at me for not being more positive about it. Looks-wise, she could afford nicer stuff and food, so she just gave off the vibe of being upper class even if she was dressed down. It was interesting because people pick up on that easily, and so there were a lot of dudes around her. Anyways, I'm rich now, and would I go back to dating a girl like that? Probably not. I'm happier dating girls who also come from humble beginnings. Story 25. Lower middle-class Mexican guy here. She was Indian and her family's household income was around $400,000 a year. This girl grew up in Dubai taking swimming lessons from Olympic coaches. She herself had not experienced any struggle. Our biggest arguments were about how I needed to get a master's and a lucrative career that could keep her in the lane she had become accustomed. Our next biggest struggles were because she didn't understand how circumstances could leave people in cycles of poverty. She really believed there were no excuses. Homeless people and poor people should just try harder and go to college to get better jobs. We ended up breaking up because, as a non-Indian or non-white person, I would have needed at least a master's degree and a lucrative career in order to meet her family. It ended me because her personality was otherwise perfect. But after that breakup, I felt worthless for years, like I wasn't good enough for anyone. Story 26. I dated several. The worst part was being rejected by her dad as an unserious boyfriend. One who I dated had a father who was one of the most successful bankers on Wall Street. Crazy money, like $100 million a year money. I never knew what really rich was until the elevator opened into a 2-story apartment in Park Avenue with a sweeping grand stairway, balconies that wrapped all the way around the building and both floors, and art that should have been at the Louvre. That kind of rich. Her dad pulled me aside on our third date and pretty much told me I was not a real candidate for her, and that she would only marry someone suitable. That if I was looking to climb the social ladder by dating her, it would backfire. He would make sure of it. It's the only time I ever talked to him. The second one made her look poor. She literally lived in a castle and had access to family houses, jets, islands all over the world. Yes, they owned private islands. The worst part, literally nothing I could do could be special. She was cool about it and always told me to save my money and not take her to restaurants. She said on my own budget. She would even enjoy it. She would rather just have takeout at home. It was said kindly and with real care that I did not blow money on her. There was no getting around it. I couldn't ever be the guy who could sweep her off her feet. On Valentine's Day, her former boyfriend had sent her 20 dozen long-stem red roses. No hotel in my budget could match what she was used to. Peninsula, one and only, Ritz-Carlton, Plaza Athene. Couldn't buy her clothes, obviously. As much as she really tried to be cool about it and say that it didn't matter, it did. It just did. I also realized that if we ever got serious, I would probably just go to work with something related to the family and never be my own man. Even as an older guy now, I look back and realize that the emotional barrier that disparity in wealth created was vast, and we would have been set up to fail. Story 27. I've dated 2 girls who came from very wealthy families. First one, I was 20 and she was 18. At that age, the biggest issue was just her being spoiled. She was so used to getting everything her way that it was impossible to resolve any conflicts. She and her rich friend circle also had no concept of money's worth. Like, she didn't understand that I didn't want to go to a private school because I didn't want a $200,000 debt with my diploma. Second relationship, the girl came from an even richer family. They were very acceptant of me and my background. I got to do some really awesome things with them while they understood I couldn't pitch in equally. In this relationship, her family's wealth clouded my judgment for a while. We both had good jobs, moved in together, and generally led a fun lifestyle, but I wasn't really in love with her, and it took me longer to break things off than it should have. The idea that if we got married, it would be set for life was tempting. Luckily, I chose to be honest with myself and am now very happily married and poor. Funny enough, that second breakup gave me some examples of how shallow people are. When I broke up with her, one of my friends literally said, "Why would you do it? She's pretty and really rich." Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.